My name's Ann Douglas, and I'm the mother of 4 children, ages 17 through 26, all of whom have had some kind of mental health issue over the years. Things were really tough for our family about 10 years ago. At that point, my daughter was struggling with depression and an eating disorder. The next 2 boys were getting into an awful lot of trouble at school with their attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And the little guy, we didn't quite understand what was going on with him yet, but he was suspended 6 times in grade 1. So it was a very, very stressful time for our family. Ultimately, our little guy would be diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is a type of autism spectrum disorder. It took a while to get a diagnosis for any of the kids, just waiting lists being what they are and so on. But I know a lot of people are afraid of getting a diagnosis, but I found that it was actually a really important piece of the puzzle. Until we had a diagnosis, we didn't know what we were dealing with, and we didn't know which parenting strategies would be the most effective. And also, when your child doesn't have a formal diagnosis, it is so much easier for people just to treat them like a bad kid and judge them and not be supportive. In a perfect world, adults would always rally behind kids and give them the benefit of the doubt, but that doesn't always happen. I found that once they had a diagnosis in place, they had certain rights and they were able to tap into different services and supports at school and in the community. I think the only negative experience we had with a care team with a bit of judgment was we were, like many families, hooked up with multiple agencies. And I remember at one point, within about a 1-month period, one agency concluded that we were being too permissive in our parenting, and another agency said we were being too protective and hypervigilant. So I decided I would just average the 2 results and figure that we were probably doing okay. But at the time, it was really hard because you sort of felt like people are jumping to conclusions about my family when they've only been in a room with me for, 45 minutes? How can you see that? And I have to mention, I went to the Institute of Families, the Institute for Families Child and Youth Mental Health Conference last year, and a really strong message that came through from a parent in the room, and I'll never forget this, was the dad stood up and he said, "Don't judge our family when you see us at our worst." You know, if you see us in an emergency room with our kid who's in crisis, that's not the best day of our life. So don't assume that that's how we function every day. That's how we function on the worst day of our life. So cut people a bit of slack and, assume good intent until proven otherwise. I really needed people to understand that a week is impossibly long to wait for any kind of diagnosis, treatment, and service. So if you're asking families to wait for months or years, it's intolerable. It's untenable. And if you can get a child to sort of be on the same page as you and to sort of say, okay, fine, I'll go for counseling or whatever, and then there's a 3 or 6 month wait, the kid has given up at that point too. And the other thing I would say is sometimes we have to look at whether a system is working in a way that is in the best interest of the child and the family. I'll give you 2 examples. First of all, my daughter went through an intake process with an agency, and she formed an immediate bond with the intake counselor, which is exactly what you want to have happen. But the agency rules said that she had to then be transferred to a permanent counselor. So that disrupted the relationship, and she never, ever, ever did form an attachment with the new counselor. But to this day, 10 years later, she's still in touch with the intake counselor. They've developed a friendship. So I think that just if we know so much about relationships and attachment, why would we say to a child who's in crisis, attach so that I can then disrupt that attachment and ask you to connect with someone else? So that was one really frustrating thing. The other thing was sometimes feeling like the hours of service for agencies or the way they operated was designed with the needs of staff primarily in mind as opposed to clients. The classic example is the eating disorder support group that took place over dinner hour. So if we were supposed to be trying to make things better for our kids and have normal family dinners and so on, and then had to miss family dinners to go to this support group, it just seemed like, what are you thinking? I couldn't make sense of that. So those were probably the 2 most challenging examples. But I would just say, think of what is going to make things better for families and then try to deliver on that basis. Imagine if it was your family. How would you want your family member to be treated, and how would you want the service to be accessible, both in time and just in the logistics of the way it operates?